She kept staring at the single dad until he said, "I know who you are." She kept staring at him from across the room. Sandra Voss hadn't touched her wine in 10 minutes. Her husband Philip leaned in close and whispered, "Do you know that man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sandra didn't answer him. She just kept looking. The Meridian corporate networking dinner filled the top floor of the Aldridge Hotel, floor-to-ceiling glass, the city lights 30 stories below. 200 of Chicago's most connected professionals working the room in suits that announced exactly what they thought of themselves. And there, near the buffet table, in a jacket that had last been pressed sometime before the pandemic, holding a glass of sparkling water instead of wine, stood Nathan Cole. He was looking at the skyline, not at Sandra. She found that almost more unsettling. "Philip," her voice was low, controlled. "Find out why that man is here." Philip Voss, senior partner at the same firm, set down his champagne and looked across the room. He took in Nathan's jacket, the fact that he'd come alone, the fact that no one was currently speaking to him. "What, him? He looks like he wandered in from a PTA meeting." He smirked. "I'll handle it." "Be subtle about it," Sandra said. Philip was not known for being subtle. What neither of them knew was that Nathan Cole had been invited to this dinner by Margaret Holloway, chair of the city school board and one of the evening's 2 featured speakers, invited specifically because she wanted his read on the education funding proposals being discussed. What Sandra Voss did not know was that the man she was so unsettled by hadn't wandered in from anywhere. He'd walked away from a world that knew her secrets, and he remembered every one of them. What Nathan Cole did not yet know was that he was about to be asked to leave, and what none of them knew was that by the end of the evening, Sandra Voss would be the one who couldn't stay. 9 hours earlier, Nathan Cole had woken up to his daughter talking to her stuffed animals. Maya had been holding court since 6:15. Nathan could hear her through the wall, her small, serious voice assigning roles, issuing corrections, narrating a whole drama that required at minimum 4 stuffed animals and a plastic dinosaur. He lay still for another 2 minutes, just listening. This was the best part of the day. Before the commute and the school budget spreadsheets and the emails that started arriving at 7. Just Maya, deciding how the world worked. He got up at 6:30. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that was solid but not new. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen window that faced a brick wall but got good morning light anyway. Nathan had lived here for 2 years. After the house had become too much, too full of what wasn't there anymore. This was theirs now, his and Maya's, and they'd made it work. Maya's drawings were taped to the refrigerator in 3 overlapping layers. Her school photos went on the wall above the TV. Her shoes were always by the door. Today's shoes had a hole in the right toe. He'd noticed it last week, had been rotating which pair she wore to buy time until the paycheck came in. School administrator's salary was not what federal investigator's salary had been. He'd known that going in. He'd chosen it anyway. He made coffee, checked his shirt, a pressed blue button-down, the best of the 3 he kept for events like tonight's dinner. He'd hung it the night before, run a damp cloth over his jacket. He looked presentable. Not impressive. Presentable. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair loose, the plastic dinosaur in one hand. "Dad, do you have to go to the fancy dinner tonight?" "It's a work thing, Bug. Margaret needs me there." She considered this with the gravity of someone 7 years old who understood that work was real and sometimes took your dad away on Tuesday evenings. "Will there be fancy food?" "Probably." "Can you bring me a roll in your pocket?" He looked at her. "I'm not putting a dinner roll in my pocket, Maya." She grinned. The dinosaur pointed at him. The dinosaur says you should. He poured her cereal, made her lunch while she ate, a cheese sandwich, cut diagonal, an apple, a small packet of crackers, and a note folded small that he always tucked into the side pocket. She'd stopped reading them in front of him, which he understood. She was 7, and sentiment was private. But he always found the notes unfolded and flattened on her desk at home. Saved. He noticed, but never mentioned it. "You'll be great," Maya said, in the tone of someone concluding an important meeting. He stopped at the counter. "What?" "At the dinner. You'll be great." She said it simply, with zero doubt, the way she said everything. He put her lunch in her bag and didn't say anything for a moment. "Thanks, Bug." Before he left that evening, Maya was already in the living room with the babysitter, deep in a negotiation about which movie they were watching. She didn't look up when he said goodbye. He was nearly at the door when she called out, "Dad." He looked back. She held up the dinosaur. "For courage," she said seriously. He stood there a second. "I'm good. He's small enough to fit in your pocket." He walked back across the room, took the small plastic dinosaur, and put it in his jacket pocket. "Okay." "Okay," she agreed, and went back to her movie. He was still smiling when he got into the elevator. He arrived at the Aldridge at 7:15, gave his name at the check-in desk, collected his badge, and made his way into the room. The dinner was well underway, conversation humming, the clink of glassware, the particular noise of a room full of people being professionally impressive at each other. He got sparkling water, found a spot near the windows to survey the agenda card. Margaret Holloway had briefed him on what she wanted: the proposed expansion of the Education Technology Funding Initiative, which sounded like something designed by a committee that had never met an actual teacher. Nathan had spent the last 3 years in schools. He had opinions. He was reading about the third agenda item when he first noticed the woman staring. He didn't react, just noted it the way he'd been trained to. Peripheral awareness, file it, keep going. She was across the room. Late 40s, expensive dress, good posture. Standing with a man who wore the expression of someone who had not genuinely listened to another person in several years. She was looking at Nathan with an expression that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite alarm, but was somewhere in that territory. He looked back at his agenda card. He knew exactly who she was. Sandra Voss, Senior Vice President, Whitmore and Associates. He'd reviewed her firm's billing practices 4 years ago as part of a 7-agency fraud investigation. Whitmore had been implicated. Sandra had been questioned twice. Charges hadn't been filed, not for insufficient evidence, but because the lead prosecutor had made a call Nathan had disagreed with and still disagreed with. Sandra had walked. Her name had stayed out of the press. She'd kept her position, kept her reputation, kept everything. Nathan had left federal work 6 months later. Not because of that case specifically. Because his wife had died in March, and Maya needed a father who came home at 6, not one whose phone rang at midnight with case developments. He'd closed that chapter. He had not expected to walk into the chapter again at a Tuesday networking dinner. He looked up once more across the room. Sandra was still watching. He held eye contact for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for her to know it was intentional, and then looked away. He found a seat at one of the round tables near the center of the room, where a woman was writing something in a small notebook. She looked up when he sat down. "You look like you're doing math in your head," she said. He glanced at her. Early to mid-30s, practical blazer, notebook with color-coded tabs. She had the look of someone whose job required her to actually pay attention in meetings. which made her different from about 80% of the people in this room. Budget analysis, he said. Work? She tilted her head. Hobby. She laughed. Claire Nguyen, education nonprofit. We fund after-school programming in underserved districts. Nathan Cole, school administration. He shook her hand. We probably deal with each other on paper. The Lakeview expansion? That's one of mine. She looked at him with a different quality of attention. You're the one who pushed back on the consortium's timeline. Someone had to. She studied him for a moment, then went back to her notebook. Good, she said. The timeline was absurd. That was when he noticed what had fallen from his jacket pocket. He reached for it quickly, the small plastic dinosaur, now sitting on the white tablecloth in full view. Claire looked at it, said nothing. He put it back in his pocket. My daughters, he said. How old? 7. She nodded, wrote something in her notebook. For courage, she asked. He paused. How did you know that? Mine used to do the same thing. She kept writing. Dog, in my case. She's 12 now and claims she never did it. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the room. Sandra Voss had shifted position. She was now on the far side of the buffet table, speaking to a man in an event staff lanyard. Her husband Philip was still watching Nathan from a distance. What Nathan didn't know was that Sandra had just asked the event coordinator to check whether Nathan Cole's invitation was legitimate. What the event coordinator did not yet know was that the answer to that question would settle nothing for Sandra and would start something else entirely. He'd find out soon enough. They all would. The dinner service began at 8. Nathan was midway through a conversation with Claire about per-student allocation models when Philip Voss arrived at their table uninvited. He stood at the edge rather than taking a seat, a power stance that communicated he was visiting, not joining, that this was a check rather than a conversation. Excuse me. Philip's voice was easy and practiced. He looked at Nathan. I don't think we've been introduced. Philip Voss, Whitmore and Associates. He extended a hand. Nathan shook it. Nathan Cole. And what is it you do, Nathan? School administration. I'm here with the board chair. Something shifted in Philip's expression. He'd clearly expected a different answer, something vague, something that created an opening. School administration was specific. Board chair was a name. Margaret Holloway's group, Philip said. Not quite a question. That's right. Philip held the pause a half-beat too long. I wasn't aware she was bringing staff. The word staff landed like he'd intended it to. Claire looked up from her notebook. Nathan took a sip of his water. She brought a colleague, he said evenly. Is there something I can help you with? Philip smiled, the smile of a man who had never genuinely been challenged. Just making the rounds. Lovely to meet you. He turned and walked away without looking at Claire at all. She watched him go. What was that? Someone taking a reading, Nathan said. On you. On whether I belong here. She looked at him for a moment. And do you? Margaret Holloway seems to think so. Claire made a note in her notebook. He couldn't see what it said. She put her pen down and looked at the agenda card. The technology funding panel starts in 20 minutes. Are you planning to push back on the consortium's rollout model again? Enthusiastically, he said. She smiled. First real one of the evening. Then Nathan's phone vibrated. He looked at it. Set it face down. It vibrated again. He turned it over. His former supervisor at the federal agency. A man named Douglas Park, who had not contacted him in 14 months. He stood. I need to step out for a moment. Of course. He walked toward the terrace doors. Claire watched him go, watched his posture change as he pushed through the doors and into the cold air. Through the glass, she could see him on the phone. He'd straightened, shoulders level, chin up. Not social posture, command posture. The voice she couldn't hear through the glass was clearly precise and low. He wasn't receiving information. He was directing it. He came back 4 minutes later. His expression was settled, but his hands were still. "Everything okay?" she asked. "An old case." He sat down. "Nothing current." "You said school administration." "I did." That posture on the phone wasn't school administration. He met her eyes. It was a long time ago. He picked up his water. The panel's starting. What Claire didn't know was that Douglas Park had called to warn Nathan. Whitmore and Associates was currently under renewed federal scrutiny. New evidence had surfaced in the original case. A whistleblower inside the firm. The investigation had been quietly reopened 3 weeks ago. Douglas had wanted Nathan to know, in case anyone from those circles turned up and made things complicated. Someone already had. Nathan set his glass down and watched Sandra Voss take her seat at the table across the room. She was still watching him. Her husband had returned and was leaning close, saying something. Sandra's face was composed, but her jaw was tight. Whatever was about to happen, Nathan had a feeling the evening was far from over. It happened during the panel break. The moderator called 15 minutes and the room shifted. People stood, refreshed drinks, clustered into conversations. Nathan made his way to the buffet for coffee. He was reaching for the carafe when Sandra appeared at his side. She didn't reach for anything. She just stood there, close, the way people stand when they're asserting territory. "I know you," she said. Nathan poured his coffee. "I don't think we've met." "We haven't, but I know who you are." Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice of someone who had been managing difficult conversations since before he was in the room. He turned to look at her. "Then you have the advantage. Nathan Cole, you worked federal oversight." She said it quietly. "Not for the room, not yet." 4 years ago, the Hendricks case." He said nothing. "I was brought in for questioning," she said. "I'm sure you remember." "I've worked a lot of cases." She almost smiled. It didn't reach anything above her mouth. "I imagine you have." She stepped slightly closer. "I'd hate for tonight's conversation to go anywhere unproductive. These are important people. This is an important evening. I don't think anyone benefits from old history being aired in this kind of room." He looked at her calmly. "Is that what you're concerned about? Old history?" "I'm concerned about the room, yes." "The room seems fine to me." He picked up his coffee. "Enjoy the rest of the panel, Ms. Voss." He walked away. At the table, Claire was watching him return. She'd seen the exchange from across the room. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. 3 minutes later, Philip Voss appeared at the table again. This time he took a seat, directly across from Nathan, uninvited. "Nathan," he said, as if they were already in a conversation. "I've been asking around. I'm not sure your name is on the formal guest list." The 3 other people at the table looked up. "It is," Nathan said. "It's possible there's been an administrative error. These events have limited capacity. I'd hate for you to have come all this way only to—" "Philip." Margaret Holloway's voice came from directly behind him. Philip Voss turned. Margaret Holloway was 61 years old and had been chair of the Chicago School Board for 9 of them. She had a way of walking into a room that made the room rearrange itself around her. "Nathan is here at my specific request," she said. Her voice carried to every person at the table and the two adjacent ones. "He is one of the most effective education administrators I have worked with in 20 years, and I'd appreciate it if you let him eat his dinner." Philip's smile held. It didn't reach anything. "Of course," he said. "My mistake." He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked away. Margaret placed a hand briefly on Nathan's shoulder. "Come find me before the panel resumes," she said quietly. "We need to go over the funding model numbers." She moved on. The table was quiet for a moment. Claire looked at Nathan. "She called you one of the most effective administrators she's worked with in 20 years, she said. "She's being generous." She didn't look like a generous person. He looked at his coffee, smiled, very slightly. "No," he said, "she's not." He almost left at 9. He'd stepped outside during a lull in the panel. The moderator was introducing a speaker Nathan didn't need to hear, and found himself standing at the valet circle in the cold, jacket pulled around him, weighing the math of the evening. Sandra Voss was inside watching him. Her husband had tried to have him removed. He'd achieved what Margaret had needed. She had his notes on the funding model. The pushback was on record. There was nothing left to prove, and no one left to convince. He could get his car, drive home, relieve the babysitter, and be in the apartment in 40 minutes. He put his hand in his jacket pocket, felt the small plastic dinosaur. He stood there for a while. The traffic noise was distant from this height. The air was cold and clear. He thought about Maya saying for courage in the same tone she used for "your shoes are untied," simply, practically, as if courage was just another tool you remembered to bring. He thought about the call from Douglas. He thought about Sandra's face when she'd said, "I'd hate for tonight's conversation to go anywhere unproductive." That word had stayed with him. Unproductive. As if truth were a scheduling problem. He took out his phone, texted Douglas, "She's here. What's the current status of the reopened case?" The reply came in 90 seconds. "Formal action within 2 weeks. Firm is already aware. Her board will be notified." Nathan typed back, "Understood." Then he put the phone away. He looked at the dinosaur in his palm for a moment. Then he put it back in his pocket, turned around, and walked back inside. What Sandra Voss was doing at that exact moment was telling 3 of her firm's board members that there was a former government employee at the dinner whose presence was inappropriate, and that someone should speak to the event organizer. What she did not know was that the 3 board members she was speaking to had already received a quiet preliminary notice from the firm's general counsel that afternoon. They were smiling and nodding. But they were not thinking about Nathan Cole. They were thinking about what their own attorneys had told them. And none of them knew that the 2 weeks Douglas Park had mentioned would, in fact, compress into something much shorter. That it would, in fact, compress into tonight. The second panel segment had been running for 20 minutes when Sandra Voss walked to the microphone. She hadn't been scheduled to speak. Nathan watched her approach the moderator, exchange a quiet word. The moderator looked uncertain, then nodded. Panel speakers sometimes made additions. It happened. Sandra Voss took the microphone. "I want to raise something about the funding allocation framework," she said. Her voice was practiced and calm. She looked out at the room with the ease of someone who had stood at podiums many times. Specifically about who should be advising these conversations. The people in this room have dedicated careers to this industry. When outside parties are brought in as consultants, she looked directly at Nathan. I think we owe it to ourselves to ask about their qualifications to advise on these matters. The room had gone attentive, not silent, attentive. Claire looked at Nathan. He hadn't moved. I think it's worth knowing, Sandra continued, her voice carrying now, whether the advisors in this room have relevant, ongoing industry experience, or whether their involvement is more... She paused, selected the word deliberately. Informal. Margaret Holloway straightened in her chair across the room. One of the 3 board members Sandra had spoken to earlier looked at his phone. The moderator reached for the microphone. Thank you, Sandra. I think we can... That's a reasonable question. Nathan's voice. He hadn't raised it. He'd simply spoken, and the room had gone quiet enough to hear him. He stood up. He wasn't a large man, and he wasn't wearing anything impressive, and he did not look like someone accustomed to standing rooms up. But something changed in the air when he stood, something in the quality of his stillness. Ms. Voss raises the question of qualifications, he said. It's a fair question to raise in a room like this. He paused. I spent 11 years as a forensic investigator for the Federal Oversight Bureau. I led 7 major financial fraud cases, the last of those. And here he turned and looked directly at Sandra Voss at the microphone. Involved Whitmore and Associates. The room did not gasp, but it went very still. Sandra's expression did not change, but her hand tightened on the microphone stand. The Hendricks case, Nathan said calmly to the room. $22 million in falsified billing to 3 separate public sector clients. 2 junior partners were charged. The investigation found activity at the senior level that was... He chose the word the way she had chosen hers. Concerning. The decision not to pursue charges at that level remains one I don't agree with. He looked at her. I'm not sure my experience is informal. The moderator had stopped reaching for the microphone. Philip Voss had gone white. One of the board members, a woman named Catherine Reeves, whom Nathan did not know, pulled out her phone and held it under the table. She was not playing a game. Sandra Voss took her hand off the microphone stand. I wasn't aware you were. I know, Nathan said, still calm. That was the part you miscalculated. He sat back down. Claire said nothing. She was looking at the table. After a moment, she wrote something in her notebook, turned it slightly, and slid it toward him. He read it. That was either very brave or very necessary. He took the pen from her and wrote underneath. Both. Margaret Holloway was already on her feet across the room, moving toward Sandra Voss. Sandra stepped back from the microphone. Her husband appeared at her side from the edge of the room. She hadn't seen him cross it. His face was tight and careful. He put a hand on her arm and said something. She said something back. 3 of the 5 people at their usual table had turned their chairs slightly away. Nathan watched for a moment, then looked back at his agenda card. But the consequences, he said quietly, not to the room, just to Claire beside him, were only beginning. By Thursday afternoon, Sandra Voss had been placed on administrative leave from Whitmore and Associates, pending the firm's own internal review. The board had voted 4-2. The 2 who'd voted against the leave motion were the ones who hadn't been at the dinner Tuesday night. Catherine Reeves, who had been on her phone during Nathan's statement, had called the firm's general counsel from the parking garage before her car had even left the building. She told Nathan this later, which was how he found out. He hadn't asked. He'd gone home Tuesday night, paid the babysitter, and sat on the edge of his bed for a while listening to Maya breathing in the next room. Douglas Park called Wednesday morning. Formal action has moved up, he said. Counsel is filing by end of the week. Her cooperation is being requested. I had nothing to do with the timeline, Nathan said. I know. A pause. But it would have taken longer if she hadn't made herself so visible Tuesday night. People talk. Nathan said nothing. You did the right thing, Douglas said. I don't know yet. You do, Douglas said. You just need a few days. Nathan thought about that. Okay, he said. And they hung up. Philip Voss was not placed on leave, not immediately. But the firm's restructuring, which was announced the following Monday in a brief internal memo, eliminated his partnership track and moved him to a senior associate role. The memo cited organizational realignment. Philip called 2 colleagues that week looking for support. Neither called back. Some distances, once created, don't close. 3 weeks later, Nathan woke at 6:30. The apartment was the same apartment. 3rd floor, kitchen window facing a brick wall that got good morning light. Maya's drawings on the refrigerator in overlapping layers, 3 photos on the wall above the TV. But there were new shoes by the door, purple ones with Velcro straps, because Maya had declared laces not efficient. She'd worn them 4 days in a row. He made coffee, the mocha pot instead of the drip machine, a small change he'd made last week. Claire had told him at their second coffee together that life was too short for bad coffee, and he'd found that hard to argue with. She was coming for dinner Saturday. It was the first time he'd cooked for someone who wasn't Maya in 2 years. Maya had been informed, had conducted a brief interview of Claire by text message, which Claire had passed, apparently, by correctly identifying that cereal for dinner was acceptable on Friday nights, and had pronounced the situation fine, actually. He got out Maya's school bag, packed her lunch, cheese sandwich, diagonal, apple, crackers. The note, folded small, tucked into the side pocket. Maya came in at 6:50, wearing the purple shoes, carrying the dinosaur. Returning him, she said, and set the plastic dinosaur on the kitchen table. He said he was done being brave for now. Nathan looked at it. Fair enough. Did the dinner go okay? He considered the question honestly. Eventually. Good. She climbed onto the counter stool. She looked at his coffee. That smells different. Better coffee. She considered this. Can I try it? No. What if I just smelled it? He slid the mug toward her. She leaned in, sniffed, wrinkled her nose, and slid it back. Disgusting, she said, satisfied. Pour my cereal? He poured her cereal. Outside, early October light came through the window, thin and sharp, and the kind of clear that only happens in the city after a cold night. The dinosaur sat on the table between them, its work apparently concluded. Maya ate and narrated something about a project at school. Nathan drank his coffee and listened. He wasn't going back to federal work. That was still true. He'd thought about it once, briefly, after Douglas called on Wednesday. And then he'd looked at the purple shoes by the door and the note from Maya's teacher about the fall art show and the cereal box with the coupon Maya had cut out because she wanted the toy inside. This was the work now. But he'd learned in the last 3 weeks that you don't have to choose a quiet life and a small one. Quiet is not the same as invisible. And the truth about who you are, about what you've seen, about what you know, that doesn't expire. Sometimes it just waits in your jacket pocket until it's needed. He looked at the dinosaur, put it back on the shelf by the door where it lived, finished his coffee, and got his daughter ready for school.